everyone. Welcome to Cyber Unbound's podcast. Today, we have a very special guest with us. We have Professor Mark Searle. Professor Mark has had a very extensive and a very successful entrepreneurial career. He has led companies in different domains such as 3D printing, big data, cybersecurity, and now he serves at UC Berkeley's Sujata Center for Entrepreneurship, where he has mentored countless startups and countless startup founders, diverse backgrounds, and different age. So, Professor Mark, it's an honor to have this podcast with you today to learn from some of your insights and experiences. So, welcome to Cyber Unbound's podcast.
Well, Shikhar, thank you for that kind welcome. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward to our conversation. So thanks for inviting me.
Also, so, sir, let's start from the beginning. You are an alumni of Harvard Business School. You got your MBA in 1994. Right after your MBA, you joined consultancy. You joined Deloitte as a senior consultant, and in a very short amount of time at Deloitte, you left that job and you became an entrepreneur. So, what actually made you pivot from a top consulting job to entrepreneurship where there was no guaranteed success? Did your experiences at Harvard and Princeton shape your interest with entrepreneurship?
Yeah, Shikhar, I think it's an interesting question to reflect back. Obviously, it was many years back now when I made these choices. And the truth is, when I was doing my MBA at Harvard Business School, I did not plan to work in entrepreneurial activities. My plan was to use my MBA to get into large corporate life in the US. I had come from a manufacturing background, and I thought I would probably stay in manufacturing. And so, to the extent I made a plan, and I really did make a plan, which was I was going to go to consulting. I got the job at Deloitte, and I wanted to do that for at least 2 years to get exposed to many different clients and many different business scenarios, and then use that consultancy experience to get into basically go to work for one of my clients. And in a way, the consulting firm was promising that not as a guarantee, but as a very viable course. In other words, I never entered consulting with the idea of becoming a partner at Deloitte. I never thought my whole career would be at Deloitte. You asked about the pivot. Well, what happened was within the first year that I was in Deloitte, less than a year actually, before I left, I wasn't really looking for a new job, but a new job found me. So a fellow I had worked with before my MBA had started a company. His company had started to grow out of control, which was good news. And he approached me and said, I've heard that you finished your MBA and you're back in the San Francisco Bay Area. I would love to have you come and be my number two guy and help us organize the operations and be COO. So an opportunity found me, but it violated my plan. It went against my plan for the consulting career. But I asked myself the question that has informed the rest of my career decisions, which was actually, what am I going to learn from each of these jobs? And what I realized was, even if it failed, which ultimately you could say it did in a way, my experience at the startup as a COO was going to be an opportunity to learn much more, and also learn things I was more interested in learning than what I would learn by being a Deloitte consultant. So it's not that I wouldn't learn anything as a Deloitte consultant, but what I would learn was how to be a consultant, and how to give advice, but not how to actually be a manager myself, and how to deal with growth and how to deal with market launches and competitive environments and all these things. I mean, being an analyst and analyzing and giving recommendations as a consultant is important and valuable and interesting. It's just less interesting to me than actually doing it. So I chose the entrepreneurial path, honestly, Shikhar, for the learning opportunity, for the opportunity to to just, I guess I'll say, accelerate my own personal growth. So.
So the startup which you joined, you mentioned that he was your friend from Harvard who invited you to become his number two.
He
Now,
was
as a
actually, I need to correct that. He was a friend from Princeton, believe it or not. So he had been a classmate of my older brother also attended Princeton, and he was a classmate and good friend of my older brother. So I knew him through the Princeton connection, which speaks to all the different places we make our connections.
Right. So, the startup founder who invited you to become his chief operations officer, he was your friend from Princeton. At the time when you became the first chief operations officer, the opportunities within the market wasn't as abundant as it is today. So, how did you get your first B2B customers or your first investors in a point of time when you were young? Age factor did not support you much, and the resources weren't as abundant. So, was it all through networking, or was there something else?
Yeah, so that was an interesting scenario in as much as I joined as a very senior person, as a COO into an organization that had already been started. So I was not the founder of the business. The founder of the business had skills that were very complementary to mine, and I think there was a lesson in that for us. That he was much more of a salesperson, I was much more of an execution and operational expert. But the way we were able to get early customers, even though we were a young company run by young people, was to be very clear in our what I'll call differentiation or competitive advantage. Sometimes people call it USP. And even before I got there, the company was making a few sales, but we really achieved a kind of a hyper growth during the time that I was there as a part of the team. And I don't take credit for this. It was really a team effort. It wasn't me individually and by any stretch. But what we came to realize as we got close to our potential customers was we got very clear about what we could offer. And what you haven't mentioned, Shikhar, but I'll mention is we were using 3D printing to deliver our services. So we were delivering manufactured components of consumer products, so mobile phones and other products, to the product designers for prototyping purposes. And what we realized was we did not have a price advantage and we did not have a quality advantage. So what does that mean? What that meant was our customers could buy exactly what we were going to deliver them more cheaply and of higher quality. So lower cost and higher quality from somebody else, from traditional prototype makers, machine shops, and so on. So what were we selling? We were selling speed. We were selling time. You can have it tomorrow because we will 3D print it overnight. Send us your CAD file. We will send you tomorrow morning by courier your part. And that was unheard of. And so we didn't talk about the price. We didn't talk about, I mean, we had to quote a price. We were expensive. And the quality was in those days lower quality than what they could buy from somebody else. So we had to simply say, do you want it tomorrow? And people said yes. And we said, okay. And of course, we did guarantees in the early going to give them comfort. If we didn't deliver it tomorrow, you wouldn't pay, and all that. But if we did, then you did pay, and we charged a lot. So the way we got customers was to not compete on the same basis as everybody else, to find an entirely new basis of competition that nobody else could match because nobody else had what we had, which was expertise in 3D printing.
Sir, after listening to your story, I feel that you're a master strategist. Strategies like no
Master,
one.
master is an exaggeration, but thank you for the compliment.
I think the audience would also be happy to hear that you have led two companies to IPO stage, a stage which most startup founders dream about. When you led these two companies to the IPO stage, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced, as well as what leadership qualities are the most necessary to lead companies to IPO stages?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason that's a big question, Shikhar, is because it's more than one thing. So when I think about two companies where I was, again, COO, and we ended up having IPOs, um, public markets. So let me back up a second. Number one is to get public, you need to be attractive to public market investors, period. And they're just a different audience from private market investors. And so we needed, and we had to learn from our investment banking advisors and everybody else what the public markets would value. And then we had to position ourselves to do that. But I think that to sort of generalize it, not to talk very specifically about the CyberGold story and the Bamboo.com story, but to talk about it, which then became my picks, but to talk about it more generally, um, really aligning all aspects of the company around the same mission. So total consistency around everything we were doing. And also message discipline. It sounds crazy, but you can't have some salesperson in some part of the US pitching a story that's different from, what we did, what we were convincing the public market investors we were doing. So what I'm going to say, obviously you mentioned strategy. We aligned our strategy around, very specifically around what the public markets would value. And that had to do with growth. And then we aligned our spending and our marketing, but not just our marketing to customers, our marketing, we started to do marketing messages that were targeted at investors, not just at customers. So all of this was part of once we made the decision that we were going to become a public company, then sort of me and my team had to do our part. I mean, obviously I was not the CFO. The CFO had to, you know, do the CFO work, but on the COO side, the make it happen side, what we really had to do was be more focused than ever before. And by focus, I mean deciding what not to do. If we had gone and said, oh, I mean, I'll give you an example. At bamboo.com, we were doing virtual tours for online real estate listings. And we were going to market on that. We were going to the public markets on that story. Salespeople came to us and said, "Oh, I have a sales opportunity. I think I can sell hotel resorts, virtual tours for hotels." We said, "No, we won't do it. We will not. We'll do it later. We may tell it as a part of our expansion story, but our story is virtual tours, homes for sale." And so we were saying no to revenue opportunities that diluted our focused message. And it's hard really to even think about that when you're a young company because, what I like to say is the key to early success is saying yes, but the key to scaling is actually knowing when to say no. The key to scaling your business, and scale is what you need for public offerings. And it's a sort of an interesting, I won't say, maybe I won't say pivot, but I'll say shift or evolution in the mindset of the management and how we communicate to our people. Instead of saying, bring me every opportunity, you say, bring me opportunities that reinforce our message. And our message at that point was very clear. So, I mean, it's a little bit of a vague answer for you, Shikhar, but it's vague in the sense that each case is different, but the thing that was consistent across all of them for me was just how intensely and we needed to focus everything we were doing on the same market, the same message, the same value proposition, so that we could accomplish the kind of scale. We couldn't dilute our effort because even though we were about to become public, our resources were still constrained. Like we didn't have infinite money available, so we couldn't be wasting time and energy on something that didn't reinforce the message.
Right. So you mentioned about that early company success comes from scaling. So, and you were also leading Kinamik Data Integrity,
Yeah.
which is in cybersecurity. I think it's one of the benchmark for today's cybersecurity entrepreneurs as well. I want to understand that what actually happened within this company. Was it able to scale? Was it not able to scale? What were the lessons learned? And according to you, what are some mistakes which should today's cybersecurity companies or entrepreneurs should avoid?
Well, there's a lot to say about Kinamik Data Integrity. Yes, we were. That was one of my companies that certainly played in the space of broadly in the space of cybersecurity. We were definitely classified as a security company, and we were in that mind part of the customer's mindset. Um, what we discovered at Kinamik, and this sometimes happens, was that our end user customers, which were largely very large, which were primarily very large organizations, had a lot of rules and or practices, either actual stated rules or just preferred practices around who they could buy from. It's actually a big contrast to the story we just discussed a minute ago about Planetics, which was a 3D printing service provider. It was 3D printing as a service. This was a business that was a business where our customers were product designers, and they were much more willing to trust a young company. Whereas in our cybersecurity world, the same thing would have held true, which is to get someone to buy from a new company, you have to be very clearly differentiated. In that case, as I said, we were selling speed. We weren't low cost. We were high speed. At Kinamik Data Integrity, we had something new. We had something different. Nobody else could do it. But we still had a very suspicious customer base. And so we needed to borrow the credibility of someone else. And in the end, it was large system integrators. I mean, in the end, we got, frankly, a little bit lucky, which was I was at a industry conference, and I met a guy. And the guy's job was a new technology scout for Accenture. And so at that time, there was somebody, and it was like it said on his business card, new technology. It was something, I forget his exact title, but it was basically he was looking for new technologies they could incorporate in their offering. And so they took a copy of our product into their lab and put it through its paces, and we met their criteria. Once we met their criteria, then we could say they took us to market, like they presented us to their customers. And that's how we started to get our initial and our big enterprise sales. We had some small revenue, but we really got our big significant revenue from working through partners. Our difficulty as a startup was that go-to-market strategy was itself a pivot from an earlier strategy. And in terms of the actual outcome for the company, it wasn't the outcome that the investors had wanted. The company ended in a what I'll call a small inside the industry sale. So a small sale inside the cybersecurity industry, not for a huge number. But our constraint there was resources. Basically, once we pivoted our sales and business development strategy, then we needed runway to make it happen. And then that meant we needed to raise more capital. And raising capital, again, I could quote the years, and if you're a student of financing history, it was after the first financial crisis of 2009. There was a banking crisis. The company had originally been founded in Spain. There was a secondary sort of echo crisis in Spain in 2012. And right around that time, we were just really challenged to raise the capital we needed. And so we had to change direction when we failed to raise capital in a fast enough time frame. So the company was not what I would call a huge financial success. I think it was quite a technological success in the sense that we were doing something that in subsequent years, had we survived, we could have, I think, ridden quite a big wave, which turned out to be the blockchain wave. But we had to exit because our investors and their investors needed to wrap it up. So I'm being a little bit vague because there's certain things I can't disclose, like how much we sold it for. That's private. But we did exit the company in a way that we wish had been bigger. Does that make sense, by the way?
It does. It does. So,
Oh,
you mentioned that it was a challenge or it was necessary for you to borrow the credibility, right?
yeah,
In cybersecurity world, trust and credibility matters a lot for
yeah,
any cybersecurity product. You two had a similar situation. But what my question is that a lot of these companies and a lot of these startups, they usually need to convince some other CISO or top professional in the industry to actually back them
yeah,
up in order to convince other customers or investors to actually use their product.
yeah,
They
yeah,
usually fall into an NDA trap. So, how
yeah.
to really avoid these NDA traps and what steps you take to navigate through these journeys?
Yeah. So I'm pausing for a second because there's a couple different elements to the answer. So absolutely, cybersecurity, it's funny because I mean, you compare like cybersecurity world, and I've had two startups in this world, to the world of like when it was 3D printing and when 3D printing was new. It wasn't even called 3D printing yet. That was a market that was inherently a risk-taking market because the customers were designers and designers were rewarded for being new. And so they had an attitude towards newness. Security is tricky because it's incredibly dynamic in the sense that the threats keep evolving. People who are attacking and technologies that are being used to attack and methodologies are constantly changing. So it's extraordinarily dynamic, but it's also by its nature a little bit risk averse. Like they need to, I mean, you said it yourself, they really need to have trust, and young startup companies have to stand out in this difficult, how do we present ourselves as both new and reliable? How can we present ourselves as um, both innovative and trustworthy at the same time? Um, and you alluded to getting CISOs or CISOs to adopt your technology. Um, you know, it's difficult in that market to just go with a guarantee, right? Because if you just say, "Oh, here's my guarantee," like, "Oh, if you know, if it, like, if it doesn't work, you don't pay." Well, if it doesn't work, you've had a major security breach, and it doesn't matter whether or not I pay, right? So you need to sort of solve this a different way. The way we solved it in both of my cyber companies was to be very prepared to be tested. And when I mean tested, I mean installed and run at their site with in their test bed with no intervention from us. So not like, oh, we're going to put our person next to your server and keep it. We put together a really, in both cases, a very bulletproof, uh, installable version for testing to prove the case. And that turned out to be very helpful. Then you get someone to trust you and use you and actually pay you money to use your product. But then they say, well, you can't disclose to anybody else that we're using your product because there's this great sort of secrecy around it. And that was both, I mean, we had that scenario in a couple of my companies where very well respected CISOs in specific industries had become convinced they could trust our product after they had put it through through their testing, its paces. And then I'm going to disclose a wrinkle of the legal world, which is we decided the answer to the NDA problem was to be very specific about what was and was not permitted. So what was not permitted was in one case, I'm just going to cite one. I'm not going to tell you who the customer was. The customer said, "Oh yeah, you cannot disclose that we're using you." Okay, well, what's the definition of disclose? And then we listed it. Can't be on the website, can't be in public marketing materials, can't be in this, this, and this. And if you listened to it and you read it, we found the places that were not forbidden. And the places that were not forbidden, again, I don't want to say everything, but you could imagine, for example, that in a in a non-recorded meeting, and again, this has gotten harder over time because now everybody records everything. But at the time, we could say out loud that they were our customer. We just couldn't put it on the website or put it in our marketing material. We couldn't say it in writing, but we could say it out loud. Or we could say it in writing, but not in something that we shared, only in our internal documents, right? So it's like, oh, okay, well, if you're at my office and I'm giving you a presentation, I can project it on the wall, but you can't take that PowerPoint with you. The one you take with you, it doesn't have that name. But the one I showed you in my office, it does have that name. So these were some of the ways that we got the word out quietly, that we had very well-respected people trusting us. And that was one of the ways we were able to borrow. So again, we didn't break any laws. We certainly didn't violate anybody's agreement, because in this world, if you do that, you lose trust. It's all about gaining trust. But we did follow the letter. And I think in the end, the spirit, because, even those people who didn't want it public that they were using our product wanted us to be a successful company. I mean, they wanted us to continue to exist, because if we disappeared, they couldn't keep using our product, right? So it kind of met everybody's needs. And again, that's the message in general I want to give to all sort of startup founders, whether they're starting new startups or whether they're starting new businesses in any context, is, try to find the place where everybody's winning, where you're winning and your customer's winning, and we're all on the same team, where it's not antagonistic. It's like we're both working towards the same goal. If you can find that, then you don't just have customers, you have allies and supporters.
Right. So I think throughout your entrepreneurial journey, one thing which remained constant was that you always led technology startups. So your expertise lies within leading technology startups. I'm sure
Yeah.
right now at UC Berkeley, you might be mentoring a lot of AI startups. And there's an AI boom happening where every startup wants to do just AI. I feel AI and cybersecurity are pretty interconnected. According to you, how can cybersecurity startups leverage the power of AI to put themselves on a competitive edge?
Yeah.
Any opinions on it?
Yeah, I mean, you know that the answer is lots of ways. And so, I mean, I think, when you look at the word AI or the name AI, and you look like, well, what's really behind that? Well, machine learning, deep learning, these things are behind that. What does AI mean? And then you ask yourself, well, somebody once asked me in my the cybersecurity portion of my career, it was a rhetorical question. We were talking, and they said, well, what's what's the sort of real-time threat detection, right? And then somebody said, well, what's faster than real time? Well, the answer is obviously predictive. And so when what the artificial intelligence world is extraordinarily good at in every field, and it doesn't matter if it's a medical field or in different fields, is the ingestion of and processing of obscenely large volumes of historical and real-time current data, that humans could never, possibly hope to process and understand. And what you get in the cyber world is the ability to use that predictively and not only reactively. And so that's where I think the reason that your statement's true, that AI and cyber are interconnected, is because of this insight that says, the future will not exactly repeat the past, but past patterns are probably helpful, almost certainly helpful in predicting future threats. And so, when you think about the enterprise of delivering, not selling, but of delivering cybersecurity, everything is about speed. And the machines can just go faster than the humans at the prediction, identification, and then deployment of remediation. And so, I mean, I just think it lends itself so naturally to the use of advanced machine learning engines and what we call AI. Um, I mean, to me, that's the story, is how do you get closer and closer? How do you use all the data that's come before to get closer and closer to first real time and then crossing over real time to be able to anticipate? And again, you can call it predictive, you can call it anticipatory, but to sort of get ahead, if you can, the threat, because you can be pretty sure in this world of more and more use of what we call artificial intelligence technologies. And I always say what we call, because different people mean different things by the phrase. So people who are interested in creating security breaches, in other words, the bad guys, if we want to use that language, they're using AI to look for vulnerabilities. So if we're not using the same, sort of in similar tools to identify our own vulnerabilities, but also to identify ways people might attack us, we are going to get crushed. So I mean, those are my sort of three different answers to your question.
So, after your entrepreneurial journey, what actually made you to transition into a coaching job where you coach different startups, you mentor different startups, advisory board of different startups? A lot of startup founders want you to be on their advisory board. They're always sending you their pitch decks. So, what inspires you to coach these startups?
You're
And can
making you're
you
making me you're making me sound more in demand than maybe I am. But anyway, sorry, go. What was your question?
So my first question was that what made you transition to
Right.
coaching different startups and mentoring different startups? And which is one startup and startup founder who you're most proud of and why? I'm sure there will be
Okay,
at least
wow.
one student
Yeah.
who you'll be
Yeah,
most proud of.
no, I mean, there's more than one. I can't choose just one. So why did I start teaching and coaching and mentoring? Um, I mean, I hate to say again, I mean, I told the story of sort of exiting Deloitte faster than I had planned. It's a little bit of a similar story in the sense that the first project I took on where I was teaching, coaching, and mentoring, I didn't seek. Somebody I had worked with before, it's going to be a familiar story, had a opportunity, needed help, thought I could be helpful and invited me to join him. And I had time available. We were just in the process actually of closing our transaction with Kinamik for Kinamik to go away and get folded into another business. Kinamik's technology got folded into another cyber business. And our data integrity business. And so I was forward looking. I had some time, and so the first project I took on was a 14-day or 13-day startup. I'll call it boot camp acceleration program, um, and it was pretty rewarding. I mean, it was pretty fun for me. I wasn't seeking it. I wasn't saying, "Oh, now's the time." None of this came like because I said, "Oh, let me now make a strategic choice in my personal career." You've accused me of being good at strategy. It may or may not be true, but in this case, it was frankly a little bit accidental in the sense that someone in my personal network who I had worked with on multiple startups before um, asked me to join him in delivering an entrepreneurial education program. And then it just people kept asking. They asked me, that organization asked me to come back twice, and then that led to something else, and then I got invited. So I just sort of started happening more or less by accident. And then one day I woke up and I was busy doing this all the time. So I didn't choose it. It sort of chose me. The reason I've chosen to keep doing it really gets to the second part of your question, which is, you know, I've gotten older in my career and in my life, and I've you know, I'm always interested in having a positive impact if I can. And I think we brought products to market in all of my startups that helped people in their careers or in their businesses. And so, you know, trying to be helpful. I think that in the case of teaching, coaching, and mentoring, you know, I can have impact if I can help entrepreneurs build their business. There are so many that I'm proud to have been a part of. You know, I can't choose just one. I will tell a great story, which is I had two founders in Berkeley undergraduates. They were second year undergraduates. They came into my course. By the time they were fourth year undergraduates, they had gotten their business off the ground and sold it. So they had founded, accelerated, gotten revenue, and sold their company all while being undergraduates, which I was pretty impressed with. So in students, I guess I like them, or I mean, I like all my students, but I was very proud of their work. Just this past semester, I had another entrepreneur working on something around climate remediation of climate change impacts. Very creative idea, very creative business model. I think he's only now getting ready in the next couple months to launch. And so I'm very proud of his work too. And then I guess on the sort of older entrepreneurs, you know, I have a team I worked with in 2015 who's based in the UK. They've now opened in the US, and they're building 3D printed robotic arms for people who lose either an amputation or are born without a hand. They're making like fully functioning robot hands. Um, and I'm very just they're having such a they're changing people's lives in phenomenal ways. So I'm really impressed with their work too. But I mean, it goes on and on. I mean, when you get to mentor as many hardworking and genius level young people as I do, I mean, you know, I could go on and on with 100 people. I'm impressed and proud of the work they've done. So
I think this field of work which you have chosen, itself is very inspiring. You're not just helping out these 100 folks or 1,000 founders, but you're also helping the customers or the potential
but
people who these founders would be helping. So it's a very inspiring work, sir. I'm sure in your career, you will agree that team building is one of the most important parts of platforms like Cyber Unbound, where we help companies hire talent,
yeah,
especially within cybersecurity,
yep.
is helping many companies build their teams forward. So, in your opinion, how do you think that are like platforms like Cyber Unbound needed in the market? Uh, why is it needed? If one of your companies, let's say if you were a CXO founder and your company would need
Yeah.
security engineers, would you hire from Cyber Unbound?
Well, look, I mean, you hit it exactly, Shikhar, which is, everybody needs a team. Nobody succeeds alone, and we need people. And what happens in growth markets, I mean, we saw this, I mean, I've seen two, just in the last 4 years, the last 3 years, there's been these two waves. One was the crypto blockchain wave, and now there's this AI wave. And what happens is, a technology gets broad adoption and application, and now all of a sudden we need people to deliver. And the delivery depends on, yes, having the machines to deliver, but also having the people to deliver. And it reminds me a little bit of the 3D printing story, which is all of a sudden people need to hire, but they need assurance of quality and they need speed. Because anybody can hire if they have enough time. If they say, oh, I can interview 20 or 30 or 50 candidates and I can take my time, but that's not this environment. We're in an environment now in cyber, in AI, where the people who need resources, who need to hire in a hurry. And so therefore a service like Cyber Unbound, which I really respect what you're doing, and I think it's very effective, as borne out by the fact that you have these very enthusiastic early adopter customers who are coming back for more. Um, all of that gets to your focus, what you've been able to do, and the reason I would, if I were a cybersecurity professional, either a cyber company or the cyber department within a broader based enterprise, the reason I would use your service or a service like yours is because you can give me assurance of quality with speed. And it's the quality with speed that we need. And back when I ran companies, instead of teaching people or helping other people run companies, I cannot tell you how important speed is once you know what you're doing, once you have a little bit of product market fit. Everything is about, I mean, we use the word scaling, and I said, scaling, you need to know what you're not going to do, because why do you need to know what you're not going to do? Because you can't scale without being replicable. So repeatability is the key to scalability. Repeatability, now you know what you need. Now you need the speed, and hiring is just a process that's been very manual for a very long time. And the more we can leverage available technologies, we're already leveraging distance learning, or not distance learning, distance working, where they don't have to all be in the same room. So what you've done at Cyber Unbound in these early days, and it's still early days for you, really hits on several points I've focused on in this conversation, which is, focus. Let's be clear about what our value proposition is for our customers and just focus on that. Let's find replicability. Let's find repeatability, because repeatability is the key to our scalability. Let's not pretend that we're something we're not. And let's just keep hammering on the thing that our customers need, that we know we can deliver, and that other people cannot deliver. And that's what I've seen from you. And anytime somebody is doing that, there's never a guarantee of success, but there's a high likelihood of success. Your very direct question, which said, if I was still running, Kinamik or Adamark Sensage or one of those, would I use your service? I would certainly be tempted to. You seem to be establishing yourself as a leader in the market. So there's a high likelihood. I mean, I can't guarantee, because that was such a different time. I mean, even we thought we were going fast, but even now things are so much faster. So
Thank you so much, Professor, for your kind words. I think we will shape Cyber Unbound to become something big under your mentorship. I think it's one of part of your mentorship journey. Because you have seen the world of evolution of how technologies evolved, were young to today. Apart from AI, which technology do you think will disrupt the market in the next?
that's a tough one. I mean, I think that what I see happening, and I actually see AI and the current AI wave or growth or bubble or whatever you want to call it, as actually the accumulation of multiple different trends sort of coming together. And I see that more and more. I do think that we're going to go back to something that we used to call IoT, but the IoT, Internet of Things, really was a marketing name for just more data sources. All it was it was just a way of saying we have sensors now. I just think we have no idea, like we can't even imagine how the proliferation of available sensors and the data they're going to be able to gather and the places we can put them. We are only 1/10 or 1/100th of the way into that journey. So yes, the AI will get more and more powerful. But my point is, it will have more and more data sources, and every data source will have more and more instances of data, more and more records that it's capturing. And if you just look at a car today, if you look at a Tesla or a new car, a 2025 car, and you just look at how many sensors there are in and on it, cameras pointing in every direction that are connected to the internet, and it's like I think, by the way, that all of these sensors and cameras are just a form of sensor. all of these sensors of temperature and humidity and air quality and wind direction. And that's a whole lot of just meteorological, but all the cameras and all the things. And I think the wearable piece of this, putting it on our bodies. I mean, it's funny. I had a team back in 2015 who said, "Oh, we're going to do real-time, vital signs monitoring. We're going to monitor temperature, blood pressure, heart rate, in real time, and blood oxygen in real time at all times." And they kind of couldn't do it because the technology wasn't good enough. Well, now we can do all that. So then it's a question of, once you can do all that, there's a real bifurcation between using it to help people and using it to suppress people and to oppress people. And I think that's the tension I predict, is as we get more and more data about more and more things happening, what are we going to use that data for? Are we going to use that data to prevent accidents and prolong life and prevent disease and identify diseases? I mentioned, there's a lot of diseases that we're still not good at detecting. Well, if we had sensors in and on the bodies of everybody at all times, could we detect them? Well, that might be very powerful for saving and extending people's lives. But there's another use of that, which is quite nefarious and quite negative. And so I think your generation will face real moral and ethical questions, as we all have, through life. Yours will be around, how do we use all of the data that we can capture? And so I think, I had a student just in my course at Berkeley last semester who was kind of really working on, ethical AI, as one of his areas of research. And I just think we're gonna see that dilemma. But the thing we're gonna see, I think, in terms of predicting, is a return to, we're going to have to get a new name for it because IoT already has a meaning, but this notion that we can have not just wearable, but embeddable technologies in our bodies that are capturing and generating data all the time, and along with our environment. That's what I predict. And I hope it's all for good. I hope it helps and improves and extends people's lives rather than is used to oppress people, but we'll see.
On a closing note, I'm sure a lot of these aspiring founders, students, professionals would watch this podcast. So, on a closing note, what's next for Mark Searle? Is there any new projects coming up or any announcements you would like to share with the audience, or any final thoughts or advices you would like to share with those students and aspiring professionals who would love to get mentored by you one day?
Well, I mean, in terms of, I don't have some big announcement to make today. I mean, certainly, there's some things that I and my colleagues in our affiliated group called the Innovation Acceleration Group, that we're kind of working on some initiatives, ideally to spread and broaden our reach and our impact. I guess my only parting words or advice go a little bit to, why do I do this work? And that is, I really strongly believe in entrepreneurship and the creation of new organizations, new products, new businesses, whatever you want to call it. I'm going to say new things, particularly new organizations of people around a technology, an emerging technology. I really think that that's the key piece, or a key piece, to prosperity and to sort of fulfilling the promise that we all have. I mean, why, your very first question was, why did I go into entrepreneurship and not into, or why did I not stay, at Deloitte Consulting or go into corporate life? And the answer has two sides to it. And it's really my message to everyone, which is, impact and agency. So I want to have impact, and I could have much more impact by working in a startup than I could by working at Deloitte Consulting, as one individual. And the impact, it was much narrower in the sense that at Deloitte, I was seeing, these big companies, but my individual human impact of me as one person was live or die in the company. I could make a decision that killed the company. I could make a decision that saved the company. My company was small. It wasn't the size of Deloitte. It was small. But at Deloitte, I couldn't even move the needle, 1%. no chance that I could have a 1% impact on that company. So I wanted to have impact. I think that entrepreneurship gives us that impact. And the other piece is agency. I was never going to choose what project I worked on, and agency, self-determination, that ended up being something really, really important to me. And so I think entrepreneurship in general, and just the creation of new things is what gives us the opportunity to maximize our impact and to accept for ourselves agency and control over our own lives. We're not waiting for somebody else to create a job for us. We're creating our own job. We're not waiting for someone to hire us. We're creating our own opportunity, and we're bringing other people along with us. And I think that that's worth it to me. That's what is fulfilling. And if I can help other people do that around the world, which I've been fortunate so far to be able to do. I mean, you're in India, I'm in California as we speak. Then I can feel, at the inevitable end of my life, every life will end. I can feel that that I've accomplished something if I've helped people achieve impact and take agency. So.
I think, Professor, this podcast has been very inspirational for me. I didn't wanted you to stop at any of the questions. I just wanted to listen and keep listening to you. I think this podcast is really motivational for me personally as a host. I'm sure this podcast would be really insightful for all those students watching us today. There's an opportunity to learn from your experience. And I'm sure, sir, after this podcast, you will receive a lot of LinkedIn messages. So please be ready for it.
Well, if people connect me on LinkedIn, they should tell me why, and where they heard about me and why they're connecting. Because if I haven't heard of you and you just say, I want to join, yeah, I won't accept. But yeah, tell me why you want to connect or where you heard of me. But thank you, Shikhar. Your words are very kind, and you're very generous to say these things. I hope that my life has a positive impact, and I hope that this small contribution of this recording is also helpful.
Thank you so much, Professor. It was a pleasure to have this conversation with you.